She found the letters on the morning of her wedding. Not hidden beneath a floorboard, not locked inside a velvet-lined box. No, they were simply there, tucked between the folds of an ivory shawl she had not worn in 2 years, as if they had always been waiting for precisely this moment to destroy her. 14 letters, each sealed in dark green wax, each addressed in a hand she recognized the way one recognizes the face of a ghost, with a cold, creeping certainty that rearranges everything you believed about your own life. Miss Ilara Voss pressed the letters against her chest and stood very still in the center of her bedchamber at Ashworth Manor, listening to the distant clatter of servants preparing the great hall below, listening to the bells of St. Clement's roll across the grey Yorkshire moors, and she thought, "I should burn these. I should burn these and be done with it. I should be a sensible woman." But she had never, not once in her 24 years upon this earth, been a sensible woman. That was, in large part, how she had come to be standing in a borrowed bedchamber, about to marry a duke she had known for precisely 11 days. Let us begin, as all great scandals do, not at the moment of catastrophe, but at the moment just before it, when everything still appeared entirely respectable. 3 weeks prior, Ilara had arrived at Ashworth Manor in the county of Yorkshire as the companion and particular friend of Lady Cecilia Branmore, a vivacious, golden-haired creature whose primary occupation in life was the procurement of admiration, and whose secondary occupation was the occasional production of genuine warmth toward those she loved. Ilara was among the latter category. She was also, it must be said, precisely the sort of young woman the Ton referred to, with that particular cruelty dressed up as observation, a wallflower. She was not ugly, she was not stupid, she was not without fortune, for her late father had left her a modest but respectable inheritance. What she lacked, in the estimation of fashionable society, was presence, that indefinable quality of demanding a room's attention simply by entering it. Ilara did not demand rooms. She observed them. She stood near the potted ferns at the edges of ballrooms, and she watched, and she catalogued, and she thought thoughts that would have unsettled every matron in London had she ever dared to speak them aloud. She did not dare. She had learned long ago that the safest woman was a quiet one. Ashworth Manor itself was a brooding, magnificent beast of a house, all grey stone and climbing ivy, with windows that stared out across the moorland like the eyes of something ancient and unapologetic. The Duke of Ashworth, she was told by Lady Cecilia in breathless, dramatic whispers during the carriage ride north, was equally formidable. "He is terribly handsome," Cecilia had announced, adjusting her bonnet ribbons with the focus of a general preparing for battle, "and terribly disagreeable. His father, the old Duke, rest his wretched soul, was an absolute tyrant. They despised one another. It is said that the present Duke returned from the peninsula having done something rather heroic and rather scandalous simultaneously, which I find deeply compelling, do you not?" Ilara had said that she found it interesting, which was not the same thing at all, but Cecilia had not noticed the distinction. His Grace Elaric Vahin, the 8th Duke of Ashworth, was, as Ilara discovered upon her arrival, precisely as advertised and entirely worse than expected. He was tall in the manner that made doorways appear an afterthought of architecture. He had dark hair that fell across his brow with a studied carelessness that was either genuine indifference or theatrical perfection, and Ilara could not immediately determine which. His jaw was the sort that portrait painters loved and dinner guests found intimidating. But it was his eyes that arrested her, grey as the Yorkshire sky above the manor, and possessed of an expression she could only describe as magnificent contempt for everything they surveyed. He surveyed her at dinner that first evening. He surveyed her briefly, the way one surveys a piece of furniture one did not order, and then he looked away, and Ilara felt, with peculiar clarity, both insignificant and strangely relieved.
She had not come to Ashworth to attract a duke. She had come because she had nowhere else particularly pressing to be, and because Cecilia had begged, and because the alternative was returning to her aunt's house in Bath, where the wallpaper was a dispiriting shade of yellow, and the conversation even more so. The proposal, if one could dignify it with so intimate a word, came on the 8th day of her stay, during a mid-morning walk in the East Gardens, when the roses were still holding the night's frost in their petals, and the air tasted of iron and coming rain. She had been alone. She had been, in fact, deliberately alone, having slipped away from the party assembled in the drawing-room, where Lord Fenwick was explaining at considerable length his theories regarding the correct management of agricultural drainage. She had her sketchbook tucked under one arm and her thoughts arranged in something approaching peace, and then the Duke of Ashworth had appeared at the garden gate, and the peace had immediately absented itself. "Miss Voss," he said, not a question, not precisely a greeting. "Your Grace, Your Grace," she replied, and waited, because he appeared to be a man who arrived at his point in his own time and resented being hurried. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, regarding the frost-tipped roses with an expression that suggested he found their persistence in the cold either admirable or offensive, she could not tell which. "I require a wife," he said at last, "not for the conventional reasons, not for affection, nor for the improvement of my social position, nor because my mother has been writing me letters of increasing hysteria on the subject since I was 22. I require a wife specifically to enrage my father's ghost and confound his solicitors, who are presently attempting to enforce a codicil in his will, requiring me to marry a woman of their choosing before my 30th birthday, which falls in 6 weeks' time." A long pause stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind moving through the garden's bare branches. "Your father is deceased," Ilara said carefully. "He is. The codicil, regrettably, is not." He turned then and looked at her directly, and she noticed for the first time that his contempt was not indiscriminate. It was specific. It was aimed at something behind his own eyes. "I have observed, Miss Voss, in the 8 days of your residence here, that you are possessed of considerable intelligence, notable discretion, and a thorough indifference to impressing anyone within a 10-mile radius. These qualities, in the present circumstance, recommend you above all others." "You wish to marry me, you said, because I am unimpressive." "I wish to marry you," he corrected, "because you appear to be entirely your own person. That is rarer than diamonds in my experience, and considerably more useful." She should have refused. Any sensible woman, and here again the word sensible rose to mock her, would have refused. Instead, she heard herself say, "I have conditions." Something shifted in his grey eyes, not warmth, not yet, but interest, which in his case appeared to be the precursor to warmth, the way lightning precedes thunder. "You have conditions," he said, and the ghost of something almost like amusement passed across his features. "Name them." The conditions were these: she would retain full use of her own chambers, she would retain full management of her own correspondence, she would not be required to perform domestic happiness she did not feel, and he would not be required to perform affection he did not possess. They would be, in all practical respects, 2 civilized persons sharing a very large house and a legal arrangement until such time as the matter of the will was settled, and they might pursue whatever subsequent arrangements suited them both.